Hi everybody. When somebody that we know, somebody that we care about, loses somebody that is close to them, it immediately creates a challenge for us in terms of how do we go about supporting them through their grief. Because there is no one way to grieve, there is also no one way to support. What might be meaningful and helpful for one person might be unwanted or even annoying for another person. One person might want a hug, another person doesn't want to be touched. So however we support needs to be tailored to the needs of the individual. Now, dealing with grief is awkward. It just is. It raises emotions that make us feel uncomfortable. We're frightened that we're going to say something stupid or do something that's going to make the situation worse. We feel helpless because there is no words that we're going to share that's going to take away the pain. There is no wisdom that we can impart that will answer all of their questions. There is no kind deed that we can do that's going to stop the hurt. But in the face of that sense of inadequacy, one of the worst things we can do is to do nothing. Not to say anything, not to acknowledge the hurt, not to engage with the person who is grieving. Because for people who are going through grief, they are keenly aware of who is there for them and who is not. And a lack of acknowledgement of the loss puts a distance between ourselves and the person who is grieving, a distance that can only be bridged through authentic connection. Now, maybe that a significant time has passed since the bereavement, but it doesn't mean that it's too late to actually make that connection, but we have to be intentional. Now, because grief is such a personal experience, we have to allow the grieving person to take the lead in terms of when to talk, what to talk about, what to do. And that means that we don't make assumptions. We don't assume that we need to fix things. We don't go into advice mode, because people who are suffering, oftentimes they're not looking for advice. I like the way Palmer Parker puts it. It's one of my favorite authors, and he says this: the human soul doesn't want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed, to be seen, to be heard, to be companioned exactly as it is. And that's the essence of empathy. To be able to step into somebody else's world without judgment, without expectation, without assumption. So don't assume. Don't assume that you know how the other person is feeling, even if you have had a similar loss. Because your experience is your experience, theirs is theirs. You don't know what the relationship was between them and the person that they've lost. It may have been a complicated relationship. So don't assume. Don't assume that just because what you want to say might be true, that it is appropriate to say. You know, things like, it was God's will. Well, we struggle with that concept of God's will at the best of times. But for the person who is deep in grief, it actually makes God out to be the bad guy. You know, things like, everything happens for a purpose. Really? So what is the purpose? Statements like that really don't help the person who is suffering. Avoid erroneous advice like, be strong. I mean, what does that even mean, be strong? What it actually indicates is that, don't share emotions that make people feel uncomfortable. Just stiff upper lip, just bury it, just put on a strong front. And the implication is that showing emotion, crying, it's a sign of weakness, when actually it is a sign of our humanity. Our goal is empathy. But bear in mind that no empathetic response begins with the words, well, at least. Well, at least you can have more children. Or, well, at least you had 20 years, or well, at least she didn't suffer, or well, at least they died in faith. Now, all of these things may be true, and they may be appropriate at some point in the future, but when somebody is in the midst of grief, don't be saying things like that, because it minimizes their experience in the moment. Yeah, great. I'm looking forward to seeing them in the earth made new, but they're missing that person right now. So don't say things that will minimize their grief, because those kinds of statements, that the unspoken second part of those statements are, so you shouldn't feel so bad. So avoid those kinds of statements. In terms of what we share, in terms of what we say, less is more. It's better that we listen more than we speak. And if you think of the biblical example of Job, here is Job. He loses his children, he loses his health, he loses his wealth. And his friends come to see him. And the Bible says that for 7 days they sat with him in silence. Not a word. The problems started to happen when they started to speak. Things began to go downhill. So it's not about what we say so much. I remember sharing a personal experience, bad news with somebody that is close to me, and their immediate response was a one-word expletive. But there was more empathy in that one word than all the well-meaning, silver lining platitudes that people shared with me, the Bible texts they quoted, or the spiritual encouragement that they gave. So it's not so much about what we say, it's about being present for the person. Now, bear in mind that when you are supporting somebody who is going through a grief experience, every person who is grieving needs somebody to pour their hearts out to. But appreciate that might not be you. You know, that's going to depend upon the level of connection that you have with that person. It might not be you, because people tend to share their hearts with those who have earned the right to receive it. So don't take it personally if that person is not you. Don't push for something that they are not willing to give. But if that person is you, then be full in. If that person is you, then listen with your heart. Allow your heart to be broken with them. Weep with those who weep. Hold the space so that they can share whatever emotions that they're experiencing, be it anger, whether they're crying. Just be present for them and be that safe space for them to express those emotions. But while you're doing that, while you are pouring yourself into somebody else's life, make sure that you have people who are pouring themselves in to you. Make sure you have a support system for yourself. And most of all, make sure that you are leaning full weight on the God of all hope and the God of all comfort, who will give you the strength to be a strength for those who are suffering. God bless you.